want you to meet a special guest, Lee Klancher, who is one of my favorite authors, researchers, photographers about tractors. Arguably one of the best, Lee, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to have you on this celebratory broadcast with us, celebrating Farmall 100. And you have a history with the brand too, going back more than a few years. Tell me about that.
Absolutely, Max. My Farmall story begins back right after I got out of college. I was asked to write a book about Farmall tractors, and I was a 20-year-old kid and decided to go to a local farm show and check out the scene. I knew about machines, but I didn't know that much about collector tractors. And I was squeezing in to take a shot of a close-up shot of an old Farmall regular. And the smell of that tractor reminded me of my grandfather. And my grandfather and I bonded over machines. He was a dairy farmer in northern Wisconsin, and he loved technology and tractors, and he always encouraged me to follow my dreams. So when that hit me, that was kind of the moment where I felt that Farmall could be an important thing to me, and books could be very important. I also, that was my very first book, and I ended up doing a dozen books. So it was a start of my journey in my professional career.
That makes it really special, doesn't it? I mean, you've done books in other fields. You've done books on motorcycles, for example.
Absolutely, and some travel. I've done a book about traveling in Alaska, so a number of things, but Farmall kind of started that off.
Your research is so thorough in these books. You know, I laugh a little bit because guys are always coming up to me at shows and they'll say, well, you know, that's not accurate the way that was on that tractor there. That didn't come out of the plant that way. And you get so many different opinions when you're visiting with folks. And part of that relates to how they were brought up with the machine, I think. But you've gone back into the archives on so many different journeys, researching how it actually was at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of what I do as a journalist is find great stories, and I love to tell great stories, and to find those you have to dig deep and look into archives to find the history of those things.
1923, that's the year that we're celebrating for the Farmall, but take us back a little bit farther in the development of the tractor by International Harvester.
Absolutely, and that the development of agriculture and tractors, it really struck home with me when I was working on the books, because it changed society. So the Farmall itself is one of the most important machines in agricultural history. And in 1923, what happened was IH was developing machines, was developing a wide variety of machines, and they started on something called the motor cultivator. The motor cultivator was a spindly machine. The idea was it would just cultivate, and it had big wheels, kind of like the Farmall. Unfortunately, it was extremely expensive, it tended to tip over, and it was underpowered. So they sold, I think, about 30 of those. But the man that worked on that machine, Bert Benjamin, loved the idea, and he kept developing. And as he developed, he did all kinds of crazy things. He was like a mad scientist working in Chicago Tractor Works. He put the engine on the front, he put the engine on the back, he made it reversible, he had big wheels in the front, big wheels in the back, but eventually he got a design that started working very, very well. And that became, he called it the Farm-All. And that became the Farmall.
He was the one who came up with that name.
He and his group, yes, absolutely.
Farm-All.
Right. The idea being, and the idea was it would be a multi-purpose tractor. Nobody had developed that yet in the early 1920s. They couldn't cultivate, plow, and turn a belt. And a lot of people knew that when that machine was built, it would be a huge hit and would be huge money. This was like the computer in the 1970s. It would be a huge innovation.
You know, it's interesting, some of those non-Farmall early tractors, if you find one today, it's very rare, and sometimes they're sought after simply because they had so little utility, and not many people bought them, right?
Yes, they were so difficult to operate, they were so big and expensive. So most of them were made for these very, very large farms or traveling operators that would rent them out, and incredibly difficult to operate. You had to really know a lot. So when the Farmall came out, that was a much easier machine to use.
I can't help but think what was happening in the world back in those years. That's interesting too, is it not, to remember, this was a period between the wars, but it was just ahead of the Great Depression also.
Absolutely, that played, the Great Depression played a big role. It depressed prices and changed all kinds of things at that time. So.
And at some point, International Harvester decided this Farmall, this is the tractor to run with.
They did, and when the Farmalls were still put out in small numbers to start, and the people that had them reacted incredibly positively. So, in fact, IH was not sure the Farmall was the direction they wanted to go. There were some other machines they had put a lot of effort into. But when they sent a lot of them to Texas, actually, because Texas was a territory they were developing at that time. And a group of Texan dealers wrote a letter to Chicago and said, hey, look, we love this, and if you're not going to build it, we will. And so IH in 1923 started really putting that out, and the reaction to it was incredible. It sold at such a level that when they built Farmall Works to build them, they were building 200 tractors a day. It actually sort of eliminated Ford from the market. The Farmall absolutely, it was the first tractor that could truly replace the horse.
And Farmalls were built certainly in more than one location, as you point out.
Yes, they were built all over. They eventually built the Farmall plant to build those machines.
And the lion's share of those came out of that plant at Rock Island, Illinois.
Correct, yeah.
It covered a lot of models. When you think about it, all of those models that came down through the line there over the course of those years, up until 1985, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That first Farmall built a heritage that lasted so long.
You mentioned some interesting personalities. We probably ought to spend a little time this weekend talking about some of those folks. I want to come back to you a little bit later on here on this weekend's broadcast to share some more comments about Farmall 100 as we're celebrating this big year with Lee Klancher, author, photographer, and the one who's given us these great Farmall books.